Sanhedrin Mem Gimel Amud Bet, the ultimate sacrifice, hazovach et Yצרו. Omer Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, kol hazovach et Yצרו, umitvadeh alav, ma'aleh alav hakatuv, ki'ilu kibdo l'HaKadosh Baruch Hu b'shnei olamot, b'shnei olamim, ha'olam hazeh va'olam haba. If somebody brings as a sacrifices his yetzer, which is a demonstration of complete self-mastery, and he's moedeh, he does vidui, he admits to having done wrong. The Torah regards it as if he's honored Hashem in two worlds. Honored Hashem in this world, you've honored Hashem in the Olam Habo. The Ribono Shel Olam sees it in that particular way, because sometimes the most valuable sacrifices are not the dramatic ones that are made in public. Sometimes the most valuable sacrifices are the subtle ones, the private struggles that individuals have with their own character, with their own being, with their own human nature. And to be able to master human nature and at times sacrifice human nature in order to do that which is right, that's a bigger sacrifice sometimes than the more public sacrifices. And we learn this from the posuk of Zovach Todah Yechabdenuni, that if one brings a Todah, a thanksgiving sacrifice, Zevach Todah Yechabdenuni, that's a double honor. The two nuns, Rashi points out, shows a double honor, Olam Hazeh and Olam Haba. What does Zovach et Yצרו mean, says Rashi? La'achar shehisito lachto. When one's yetzer hara, one's passion to do something which is wrong, one's natural desires to do something which is not permitted, persuades one, hisito seduces one, lachto to sin, hu zovcho v'horgo, he slaughters it, kills this yetzer hara within himself, v'shav b'tshuva, and then he does tshuva, u'mitvadeh alav, and he does vidui. That's the case that we're talking about. Why does it mean Zovach Todah Yechabdenuni? Why are we talking about bringing a thanksgiving sacrifice? So we learn this posuk of Zovach Todah. We see the Meforshim learn it. The Gemara clearly is learning it that way. It doesn't mean a korban Todah. That's not what it means. We'll see in the Medrash also how the Medrash learns it. But Zovach Todah comes from the word vidui, a person who makes a sacrifice by making a vidui, by confessing, by admitting to have done something wrong. That's a sacrifice, to actually come forward and take accountability. Everybody says they want people to take accountability. Yes, but you've got to understand how difficult it is to take accountability, to actually accept that I've done something which has caused harm, I've done something which is wrong. That's like bringing a korban. That's not a simple thing. That's the Zovach Todah that the posuk is talking about in Tehillim, and the posuk goes on to say v'sam derech, and he sets a pattern, a pathway. Arenu b'yesh Elokim, I will show him in the salvation of Hashem. It seems from Rashi, la'achar she'isito lachto uzovcho v'horgo, it seems to be that he doesn't actually do the avera, that the yetzer hara gets him. One has this desire, this enormous desire to do something wrong, and you hold back. You want to talk Lashon Hara so badly. You want to do something in business which isn't 100% straight. There's situations, things that one wants to do. One wants to do something on Shabbos with it, which isn't 100% according to Hilchos Shabbos, and you hold back. And you don't do it. That seems to be what Rashi's talking about. That's the zevach, that you slaughter, you so to say, bring as a sacrifice your passion to do something wrong before you do anything wrong with it, which aligns with the story that Rashi brought back on Daf Lamed Aleph. We didn't actually have a Matmonim on it, on Daf Lamed Aleph at the end of Zebora, but we have referred to that Rashi before, where Mar Ukva is referred to in a letter as Lidezivle Kvar Bitya. The letter is written to Mar Ukva, and he's addressed as the man who radiates as much light as Bar Bitya, which Rashi says is Moshe, who was raised by Bitya, the daughter of Paro. And he radiated light. We know that Moshe's face radiated light, and Mar Ukva radiated light in the same way. Why? So Rashi brings from Sefer Haggadah, Shaya Mar Ukva Bal Tshuva. Mar Ukva was a Bal Tshuva. He got sick from love with a married woman. He fell in love with a married woman, and he was so passionate about this woman that he actually became ill. Liamim nitzrecha lelavot mimenu came a time where she needed to borrow money from Marukva. Umitoch dochka nitratzet lo. And she was so desperate that she came to Marukva and said, okay, if you'll help me out financially, we can have a relationship. And he lent her the money and sent her on her way and didn't touch her. And that resistance that he experienced in terms of his own Yetzer Hara, there was a heavenly fire used to fire from his head, from his forehead. He radiated this light from the effort, from the resistance, from the kedusha of the way he managed himself. And that's why he's called, Rabbi Nosson called him tzutzita, the sparkling one, the one who radiates. And we understand this if you look at it in life, in physics, and we know that the rules of nature are the rules of the Torah. It's all the same set of laws. That's what happens in a light bulb, isn't it? You pass electrons through resistance, and the faster the electrons, the more electrons that go through a tighter resistance, the more there's fire. That's the nature of resistance, and that's the zoveach et yitro. You light a fire. You bring a sacrifice. It's a mizbeach. When you take your Yetzer Hara and you resist, and again, with Yetzer Hara, it doesn't have to be something as dramatic as Marukva's case, just every situation where we want to do something that isn't right, or we don't want to do something that is right. And we overcome that. We do get up in the morning, and we come to learn, and we come to daven, and we keep our mind focused during the davening instead of letting our mind wandering. And we want to look at our cell phone in the middle, and we don't. We keep ourselves... There are these pulls that pull us, and we resist, we hold back. The same as in the gym we've often talked about. The resistance that we experience from gravity when you lift a weight is what makes you strong. And so it is morally and spiritually. The resistance you experience when you hold yourself back from doing something you want to do wrong, that's what builds capacity. That's what builds spiritual muscle. And to the point where it can even, that spiritual muscle translate into fire. It can be so powerful. And that would support this idea that we see, that Rashi suggests, and Rav Dessler in Michtav Miliau learns the Rashi that way and the Gemara that way. And he talks about the fact that the greatest Kiddush Hashem is the Kiddush Hashem nobody knows about. Because when there's a Kiddush Hashem that is public, there's a bit of ego satisfaction as well. Even if Chas v'Sholom, it's the ultimate sacrifice, a person's giving their lives, at the end of the day, you get a street named after you, you get a park named after you. There's some self-interest in it that comes in it. Not that Chas v'Sholom anybody thinks of that at the time they're giving their lives, al Kiddush Hashem. But it's even greater when you're giving Kiddush Hashem, when you're performing Kiddush Hashem, you're killing something inside of you, something bad, but something very powerful. And you're actually mastering it and you're dominating it. And nobody knows. Nobody knows what you could have done and didn't do. People know what you did. And that's why the Gemara goes on and says, V'omer Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, the same Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, is man shebeit hamikdash kayim adam makriv olah schar olah biyado, schar mincha biyado. In the time of the Beis Hamikdash, if a person brought a korban olah, he had the reward of a korban olah. He brought a korban mincha, he had the reward of a korban mincha. Aval mi sheda'ato shfela. But if a person is truly humble, that's as if you brought all the sacrifices. Because greatness is not in what you do, what you've accomplished, as much as who you've become. Who you are is a greater accomplishment than what you've done. Because what you've done is the one thing. You built a business, so you built a business. You built Microsoft, great, incredible thing, it's amazing. Look what you've done to change the world. But that's all you've done. You built Microsoft. But if you've mastered your character and you're an amazing human being, then everything you do is great. And more than that, nobody knows about it. Who you are, nobody knows about. What you've accomplished, everybody knows about. So if you bring a korban olah, everybody knows you brought a korban olah, and you get credit for it, and they say yishukach to you after the korban olah. When you come out of the Beis Hamikdash, everybody's there congratulating that you bring a korban chatos, all these things, a korban mincha, all these things. You've done the action. But when you change who you are and you master who you are, that nobody knows about. That you could have spoken Lashon Hara and you didn't. That you could have looked at your cell phone in the middle of Chazaras Hashatz and you didn't. That you could have spoken to somebody in the middle of Chazaras Hashatz and you chose not to. Nobody knows about that. That's even greater, says the Gemara. And so the Rabbi Dessler says in several places that Kiddush Hashem, which is personal and private, is far greater than Kiddush Hashem, which is dramatic and public. And there's a beautiful story that the Beis Yisrael told. The Beis Yisrael was the Geira Rebbe in the 1970s. I met him several times. What an experience, just a different kind of a human being, the Beis Yisrael. And the Geira Rebbe told the story in the name of Reb Simcha Bunim Mipshischa. Reb Simcha Bunim really affected the whole of modern Hasidus. Ger comes from him, and Kotz comes from him, and Sachachov comes from him. He really influenced the thinking, and when you learn the works of Reb Simcha Bunim, it's very difficult to distinguish it from the works of the great Mussar masters. And one thinks of Hasidus and the Mussar people as being very different, but when you learn Reb Simcha Bunim, there's very little difference. Reb Simcha Bunim was an amazing person, an amazing leader. He was a businessman for some of his life, an important Hasidic Rebbe and a Mekubal. And we don't have much from him. What we have from him is what other Rabbeim have told in his name. And there's a work that gathered together all called Kol Mevaser, where this person gathers together whatever he's been able to find reliable in the name of the various Hasidic Rabbeim who quote Reb Simcha Bunim. And the Beis Yisrael, back in 1976, I think it was, gave or 1973, gave a shmuz, and in it he talked about a story that Reb Simcha Bunim told about Reb Shmelka Horowitz. Reb Shmelka was once a Talmud of the Vilna Gaon, big tzaddik, and then he became a Talmud of the Maggid Mezrich. So he's one of these people who got Torah from both sides. And the story with Reb Shmelka was he had to be a sandek at a bris, and he was late. So they gave the sandekaut to somebody else. And later that day, they came to his shir. He would give a shir every day, and the Talmidim expected him to be very downcast and upset that he missed the opportunity to be the sandek at the bris. It's such a great mitzvah, and normally he would be in a bad mood, but he was in the best mood ever. And they asked him afterwards, how come you're in such a good mood? You missed the mitzvah. So he said, with every mitzvah, there's a bit of ego. With every mitzvah, here you've got an example of, Reb Simcha Bunim tells the story, so you've got an example of the Mussar in the Chassidus. It says, with every mitzvah, there's a bit of ego. You just do the mitzvah. You're proud of yourself for doing the mitzvah. He says, but when you try to do a mitzvah, but you can't, due to circumstances beyond your control. The Gemara says in Brachos and Daf Vav, HaKadosh Baruch Hu mitzaref machshava l'maaseh, that if you had an emergent situation which stopped you from doing a mitzvah which you planned and were ready to do, Hashem regards it as if you did the mitzvah. He said, so I got the mitzvah. It's not my fault I wasn't there. It was an oines. So I got the mitzvah of the sandekaut, but nobody saw. I didn't have the kovod. I didn't have the honor. So there was no ego in it. I got the full benefit of the mitzvah without having had to include any ego into what I did. And there again, we see this idea that when there's a Kiddush Hashem without ego, when there's a Kiddush Hashem in total private, Hatsnei alechetem Hashem elokecha, that's why that is so important. To do things quietly that people don't notice, that people don't know. That's where the greatest accomplishment is to be found. The difficulty with this, with Rashi, as it's understood by Rav Dessler and others, is the Medrash in Parshas Tzav, where the Medrash brings the same posuk, and Zoveach Todah Yechabdinuni, Zoveach Chatat, Zoveach Hasham Ein Ktiv Kan. It doesn't say if you bring a korban chatat, if you bring a sacrifice for sinning, you've honored God. Ela Zoveach Todah, Lama Chatat Ba'al Chet, V'Hasham Ba'al Chet. With all the others, there is sin involved. But a Todah Eno Ba'al Chet, Im Al Todah Yakrivenu. But with a korban Todah, there's no sin. It's just purely giving a korban to Hashem. Davar acher, the Medrash goes on and says, Zoveach Todah Yechabdinu, Zeh Achan, Shezavach et Ytzro betodah. We can learn Todah as vidui, as confession, and apply it to the case of Achan. When Yoshua conquered Yericho, he then put a cherem on Yericho. Nobody could get any benefit from it. Nobody could ever rebuild Yericho, and it gave a very strong curse for anybody who would. After that, there was the attack on Ai, and we lost 36 people in the attack on Ai, and Yoshua was incredibly distraught. And the war turned against the favor of the Jewish people, and Yoshua davens to Hashem and says, we're going to lose every battle because now people see we're not invincible. This isn't a good thing. So help us. Hashem says, you're in trouble because people have done what they shouldn't be doing. Yoshua does by a process of kind of a lottery. Everybody passes before the Oren, and it emerges that Achan is the culprit. And Yeshua says to Achan, just confess. What did you do? Because you're causing trouble for all of us. Just to be mechaber, do an honor for Hashem, and confess. Achan says, yes, I saw a fur coat and I saw gold and silver there and I just couldn't resist. So I helped myself to it, and it's buried in the safe under my bedroom. That's where you'll find it. They go and they look, they find the material, and they put Achan to death. And that's the Medrash says that's what we're talking about. Yechabdinu, Achan did that as an act of honoring of Hashem. But in that case, the chet was done. This was real tshuva. This is not talking about like the case of Marukva. This is not talking about a person resisting sin. This is talking about Achan who sinned and then did tshuva. So what does the Gemara mean when Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi says, Kol hazovach et Ytzro umitvadeh alav? Is he talking about somebody who restrains himself from doing wrong? That's the greatest Kiddush Hashem and honor? Or is he talking about somebody who did wrong and then did tshuva, like Achan? Which one are we talking about? We understand from the Medrash, it seems that we're talking about where the Issur was actually done. But if we learn a piece of Tiferet Tzion, we can probably resolve it. The Tiferet Tzion is Rabbi Zev Yadler, at the turn of the century, the end of the 19th century. He was in Eretz Yisrael, he was in Yerushalayim, he was in Tveria for a period of time. He used to give many shiurim every day. He used to give a shiur on Medrash, and the Maharil Diskin persuaded him to publish his notes from his shiurim on the Medrash, because the Maharil Diskin said there isn't anything like that. Mm-hmm. And it's true. It's the only parish that I sometimes refer to when we learn Medrash every morning on Shabbos morning. This is the only parish I'll sometimes use on Medrash. And he goes through it. He has a beautiful piece here, and he says, if you look at the case of Achan, by confessing, he gets killed. So there's no ego in his confession. By confessing, he puts himself afomita, and he knows that. He could have just denied it, and then there were no witnesses. He could have just denied it, but he didn't. And that was his greatness. That's why he's quoted here as a zoveach todah yechabdenuni, that he brings his yetzer hara as a korban, as a sacrifice. He sacrifices and confesses, and thereby gives his life, because Yoshua told him to, the dvarav hakadoshim shel Yoshua yardu bechedrei vitno. The holy words of Yoshua pierced the innards of his being, of his gut. And the only reason he did vidui is to honor Hashem. And in this way, he taught Baalei Tshuva how to do it. So what are we learning? The way that Tiferet Tzion understands the Medrash. What was the exceptionality of Achan? That there was no ego in this act. He got nothing out of it. He was killed for it. He got no benefit from it whatsoever. Now, we're not all put in that situation, thank God. We've got to have situations where to do tshuva, we're going to be killed, we're going to lose our lives. So how could we do tshuva in a way where there's no ego? The way we can do tshuva when there's no ego is the way Rashi explains our Gemara, that you do tshuva before you've even done the wrong. You're doing tshuva for the fact that you were about to do wrong. You're doing tshuva for the fact that you want to do wrong. You're doing tshuva for the fact that that's where your mind was. That you were wanting to do wrong. To do tshuva in that situation, what ego do you get? Nobody even knows about it. You have this burning, craving desire, like Marukva, let's say, or you have this burning, craving desire, this addiction to your cell phone, and you're about to take it out in the middle of davening, and you don't. So who comes up to you and says, Yishker, that was amazing what you did. Thank you so much for not disturbing our davening. Nobody notices. Nobody says a thing. Nobody knows what struggle you went through to overcome it. Nobody knew what struggle you went through, not to stay in bed, but to get up early in the morning and to come and learn. Nobody knows that struggle. The struggle is private. The struggle is personal. And that's la'achar shehisito lachto hu zovcho v'horgo v'shav b'tshuva. That's the kind of tshuva, that's the kind of resistance which gives a person the same level as Achan had. Although Achan actually did the Avera and then did tshuva, but since he got no ego benefit out of doing the tshuva, so too when we do tshuva before we even do the Avera, nobody knows about it, it's in private. It says, Rav Desta says, a Kiddush Hashem that is betzino, that is in private, that nobody knows about, is the greatest Kiddush Hashem of all, greater than the dramatic Kiddush Hashem that people do in public.